We're recording. Okay. Today's session is an introduction to assessment for learning. Sometimes that's abbreviated as AFL. The way it should be abbreviated is capital A, lowercase f, capital L. Assessment for learning. Assessment for learning is a type of formative assessment. There are two key types of assessment that we will consider in this module. There's formative assessment and there is summative assessment. Summative assessment comes at the end of a block of work, or at the end of a unit of work, or at the end of a course, or at the end of a degree. It is a marker to how well the student has done up to that point. It will take the form of a grade or a percentage, A, B, C. So it's the sort of thing you get when you've done your GCSEs or your A-levels, or the sort of thing when you've done a driving test. You get to the end of the driving test and the driving instructor, the driving tester says, thank you so much, Mr. Nash, you have passed your driving test. It's what you get at the end, and it's a judgment that says how well you've done building up to that point. That's summative assessment. It sums up what's happened, what you have done. Formative assessment informs the learner about how they can improve the work they are doing. So if you picture yourself in a driving test, in a driving lesson, and you're driving along there, your driving instructor will be saying, you know, we're coming up to a junction, what do you need to do at the junction? And you'll go, right, okay, I need to brake, I need to change gears, I need to signal the direction I'm doing. So the driving instructor is asking questions and you are thinking about what you need to do and you are explaining that to the driving instructor. The driving instructor is not going to make a decision at that point whether you've passed the driving test or not. This is a formative exercise. The driving instructor is asking questions and you are answering those questions, and this helps you to think about your learning, and it helps the driving instructor to think, okay, what does this student driver know and not know about driving? What do I need to do with this learning student to enable them to succeed and to pass their driving test? That's formative assessment, and that's formative assessment in a car. What we're focusing on is the idea of assessment in education. So what I'm going to talk about today is the idea of the feedback, the questioning, the marking that teachers give pupils in order to enable pupils to improve their work, to develop, to get higher marks. I've given you 3 tasks to prepare for today. Sorry about the noise, it's the bathroom still. You'll get some bursts of drills and things. I've given you 3 preparatory exercises for this particular session, and I know that some of you have already looked at that because I've seen some questions about the Cambridge assessment resources. So let's just go and have a look at those. I'm going back to share my screen. I'm going to go to the Aula Centre. So I'm on my desktop now, and I'm going to go straight to this resource, which is the Getting Started with Assessment for Learning. I'm assuming that you can all see my screen. Could I ask one person to, let me think who that could be. Eldred, I can see you're on the call. Could you turn on your mic and just say, yes, you can see my screen?
Yes, I can see the screen.
Fantastic. Thanks, Eldred. That's brilliant. So I'm looking at the Getting Started with Assessment for Learning website. I think this is a really good resource. And as I was thinking about this session, I was thinking, well, I can put together a kind of PowerPoint for you, but actually what this does is it really effectively covers the whole background of assessment for learning. It's got some really great links to other resources which you can use, and it clearly explains what assessment for learning is. So just don't forget now, assessment for learning is a type of formative assessment. Basically, people who write about assessment generally think about assessment for learning and formative assessment being the same thing. And for our purposes, assessment for learning and formative assessment are the same thing. There's lots of good stuff here. Let's just go down the page a little bit here. So we've got definitions here. It talks about feedback. It talks about the process. And you've got some good links here to other sources. It talks about the types of things that teachers will do when they are using assessment for learning. So we've got the idea of questioning. So when I did the introductory chat about what we're covering in this session, I talked about the driving instructor asking the driving student some questions. So questioning is a key element of assessment for learning practice. When I say practice, I mean what happens in the classroom. So the teacher will ask students questions. The teacher might ask one student a question. Students might ask other students questions. So it's the idea of questioning being a way of students informing their understanding of something. Teachers will provide feedback. That's significant, and that's what you will see in the examples that you are going to be, where you're going to be evaluating teachers' practice. You will see teachers providing feedback, and the feedback may take the form of words and sentences written. The feedback may take the form of written questions. The feedback may take the form of written marks, such as question marks, or ticks or crosses. So all of those things are feedback. The stuff that teachers give to learners, that's feedback. Feedback can also be oral, spoken feedback. Of course, you can't see that oral feedback in the examples you look at. However, that doesn't stop you writing about oral feedback in your evaluation, in your exploration of good practice. So you can see the written feedback on the page and you can talk about that and you can evaluate that, but you can also explore the possibilities of what the teacher could do in the classroom to support the learning. Because what you're trying to do with this evaluation, with this assignment, is you're trying to demonstrate your theoretical and practical understanding of what assessment in the classroom might look like. This is important. Students understand what successful work looks like for each task they are doing. I'm going to talk about that a little bit later on, because that applies not only to what happens in primary schools and secondary schools and further education colleges, but it applies in universities. Students become more independent, so there's the idea of peer assessment and self-assessment as being key strategies in assessment. And you've got this idea, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit, the summative assessment being used formatively. Summative assessment being used formatively. I'm just going to stop sharing my screen for a moment and come back and talk about that briefly, because that might sound a bit confusing. So I've told you that formative assessment is something that happens during the process of learning. Teachers will write on pupils' work. Teachers will talk to pupils. They'll ask them questions. They might write questions for pupils. They might ask pupils questions to develop an understanding of where the pupil is. And they may provide guidance on how the pupil can improve their work. That's all formative. And I've said that summative is the thing that happens at the end. At the end of a unit of work or at the end of a module, you get a mark. And I've sort of suggested that those two things are different. They are not connectable. You've got either formative assessment, which is what happens during the process of learning, and you've got summative assessment, which happens at the end of the process. It's just a marker, it's the grade. But I want you to think now about your own summative marks as a student at university and think about what they look like. So you hand in your work on Turnitin, and after 20 days, you get your mark, and your mark will consist of a grade, and that grade is summative. That's fixed. It's a mark for what you get for the piece of work that you have completed. And you get feedback. And the feedback at that point suggests things that you might do to improve your mark for subsequent pieces of work. So what you've got to work on to do better next time. If you get a mark of 60, the feedback will be aiming to push your mark up next time to 70. If you get a mark of 40, the feedback is about pushing your mark up next time to 50. So there's an interesting example of assessment being simultaneously summative, giving you a mark, and formative, making suggestions, giving you guidance for how to improve your mark next time. So what I'm asking you to do here is be a little bit more creative about your thinking with summative and formative assessment. They're not completely different things. There are lots of circumstances in which formative and summative assessment can be linked together. Okay. I'm going to go back now to sharing my screen. I've talked a little bit about the Cambridge assessment information. Before I go there, I'm just going to pop into the chat because I think it was Georgia asked a question about the Cambridge assessment overview, and we were agreeing that it's really helpful. Georgia asked, how do I reference it? So I've put some information about how to reference the Cambridge assessment guidelines there. I've checked it. I don't see any information about date of publication, so you would indicate that's no date. The author would be Cambridge Assessment. The title is Getting Started with Assessment for Learning. And then, as you know, because you are now in the third year and you've been using LSBU Harvard referencing now for full on 2 years, going into your third year of using it, you need to provide information about the URL. That's the website address, and you need to say where it is, where it's available from, and when you access that information. Okay, thanks, Georgia. I've put the information in your chat, but it's all about going back to Harvard. Okay, I'm going to share my screen again now. So let me stop it there and share my screen. I'm going to go back to that site. So I think that's really useful, the Cambridge information. It's going to form a really good sound basis for your understanding. And what's useful about it in addition is that some of these sections, like the section on misconceptions, so when you click on the links in this bar, it just runs you down. It's a single document that's arranged in chunks with some nice hyperlinks in there. It introduces some ideas which get people to challenge their misunderstandings about what assessment is. So, for example, the idea that assessment and testing are the same thing. I've already spoken about the idea of summative assessment being potentially the same as testing, because testing is something you would do perhaps at the end of a process. But of course, you could also use testing in the middle of a process to see how well your students are understanding something. And as a teacher, that would help you understand what you need to work on more in order to improve the outcomes for those students. I like this idea here, the misunderstanding that teachers who use AFL will lose control of their class. So why they have included this in the website is the idea that if you're using AFL, you are giving students responsibility for assessment, and the Cambridge assessment organisation is suggesting that some teachers may be uncomfortable about that, because by handing over control, you are in danger of losing control. And it's important there to understand students, learners, pupils having control of assessment enables them to do better. It's about trust as well in the classroom. That's an important thing to have in any classroom. So spend some time, if you've not done so already, spend some time exploring the Cambridge assessment website. The other two activities I referred to, so we looked at this one here. I think you're still with me. I asked you to look at the Assessment for Learning 10 principles, and I'm just going to bring that up here. I'm just going to stop briefly sharing my screen. I'm still not 100% confident that when I share my screen, you see what I see. So that's why I keep coming back to this screen and then opening. At some point, I'll become hugely confident with this and we'll stop sharing my screen. So let's go back to this screen, which is about the assessment reform group. So the authors of this particular document are the Assessment Reform Group, abbreviated as ARG. They published this in 2002. Now, this is a core document for thinking about the definition of assessment for learning. And in this document, this is assessment the Assessment Reform Group give us some explanations about what teachers should be doing or should be aware of or should be capable of doing in the classroom in order to make assessment for learning happen. So, for example, here, the Assessment Reform Group say that assessment for learning should be sensitive and constructive because any assessment has an emotional impact. Let's just take that one idea. So when you are looking at examples of teachers' feedback, one question you could ask yourself is this teacher demonstrating or providing evidence of being sensitive and constructive? So look at the language they use. How do they give the information, what the pupil is doing to the pupil? How do they inform them? Are they constructive or are they insensitive and destructive, if you like, the opposite of that? So is the language that the teacher is using sensitive and constructive? Sensitive meaning understanding the needs of the pupil, understanding the potential emotional impact of their comments, and is the language that they use constructive? Is it giving something to the pupil that enables them to build on what they are doing? And there are lots of good examples in this particular document of the sorts of things you see in classrooms according to the Assessment Reform Group. Here we go. That sort of echoes that last point there. Learners should receive constructive guidance about how to improve. So in the feedback from the teacher, is there guidance about how to improve? Does the teacher say, in order to improve, this is what you need to do? Or does the teacher imply that? So they might not say it explicitly, but they might imply that in order to do this better next time, this is what you need to do. Okay? So this is a really useful document for you in terms of thinking about examples of teachers' written feedback and how they can ensure that this written feedback is effective according to the ideas of the Assessment Reform Group. So a key document for you. Okay, I'm going to come back to the screen briefly, just check that if there are any questions. Nothing at the moment. Is just generally speaking, can I ask a couple of you, Connor, Nadia and Piravina. Is that clear so far? Lovely. Thanks, Connor. Thanks, Nadia, and thanks, Piravina. That's super. I just thought I'd check in with you just to make sure that I'm going at about the right pace. So the last activity that I wanted you to do, which is makes us think a little bit more critically about assessment, is I provided you with some examples of feedback on pupils' work, or not feedback, on what I asked you to think about what the teacher might say to the pupils when they're marking this piece of work. And this talks about success criteria. So success criteria are a key tool that teachers use when giving feedback to pupils. The success criteria tells the pupils, this is what you need to do in order to succeed in this piece of work. This is what I'm looking for in your work. And if you do this, your piece of work has been successful. Sometimes in primary schools, teachers use the abbreviation WILF, W-I-L-F, what I'm looking for. So basically teachers are saying to the pupils, I'm looking for this. If I've got evidence of this, then you've done well. And it's important to flag up. This is a key element of assessment for learning. Pupils need to know what is expected of them in order to succeed. So it's important that you tell the pupils, this is what I'm looking for, so pupils actually know what they're expected to do. So these are just some examples to think about. So the success criteria, this is what the teacher told the pupils. So the pupils were aiming for these things. They were going to provide clearly defined characters, a storyline that engages the reader, include a dilemma, write in paragraphs, and use tenses, past tense, future tense, present tense, appropriately. So let's have a quick look at this example. I'm just going to look at two of these and talk through two of these. So let's think about, first of all, paragraphs. Okay. This pupil has written in paragraphs. So that success criterion, so criteria is multiple, C-R-I-T-E-R-I-A, means multiple, a multiple of criterion. Criterion is one, criteria is more than one, two or several. So has the pupil met that criterion? Yes, the pupil has written in paragraphs, and you can see that the paragraphs are really clearly distinguished. There's a gap there between the first paragraph and the second paragraph, and the second paragraph and the third paragraph. So yes, the pupil has written in paragraphs. Has the pupil got defined characters? Well, let's have a see. We've got the two animals. There was a snake and a shark. They could swim. The shark had shiny white teeth and he was happy. The snake was bored. He had nothing to do. So the shark showed the snake his new something, his new tie. Not sure what that is. Okay, clearly defined characters. Yes, check, tick. Okay, so we've got the shark and we've got the snake. They're clearly defined. Does the storyline engage the reader? Yeah, I think so. So we've got this shark and the snake, and the animals came, and they met some more animals, a fish and a rabbit, and the snake. Something happened there. The fish tried to get out, but he couldn't get out, etc., etc. So yeah, absolutely, the story engages the reader. Is there a dilemma? So a dilemma is when you're faced with something, and it gives you a choice, but usually a tricky choice. So the fish tried to get out, but he couldn't get out. One of the other animals tried to help him and shouted, "Hey, shark, come here." And the shark did. The snake was swimming. Whatever that animal is there, at the shark and cut the shark in half. So there's a threat to the shark, and they've got to try and manage dealing with the shark and not getting eaten by the shark. So there's a bit of a challenge there and some choices. Do they run away? Do they stay and help each other, etc., etc.? So you've got a dilemma there. Appropriate use of tense, tried. So some letters are the wrong way around there, but it's the past tense. Came, saw, shouted. So I can see the past tense being used throughout. So for me, that pupil has met all of the success criteria. So then the question for the teacher is, okay, what do I say to this pupil to help them improve their work next time? Because they've met all of my initial success criteria. So I need to think about things to do that are different and more challenging for this pupil next time. The trap not to fall into here is that the success criteria have nothing to do with spelling. In this particular set of success criteria, the teacher hasn't included a spelling success criterion. So although the pupil has inverted some letters, so that word there is tried, and they've written T-I-R-E-D, they've got the R and the I the wrong way around, that's not a problem for the purposes of the success criteria. The teacher hasn't said, make sure you get all your spellings right. I would suggest also that a longer term thing for this pupil is about their joined up writing. It strikes me that this pupil has been introduced to joined up writing a little bit too early, and they are struggling with joined up writing because you can see the odd sort of fake joins that might not help this pupil with writing fluently. So you might do some work around them with letter formation. Okay, success criteria, does that make sense? I'm going to ask, let's ask a few different people this time. Justna, does that to you? And Fazana? Just need to type into the chat function the idea of success criteria, and I'm going to ask one other person, Charlotte Tolley. Lovely. Justna, thanks for getting back to me. That's brilliant. And fabulous, Charlotte, that's great. So success criteria is a really interesting thing to think of. So in the examples that you look at, there may be very clear success criteria, and that might be helpful for you to comment on. But even if there aren't success criteria in the examples that you look at, you can still write about success criteria and write about how the teacher could have used success criteria to help the learner. So when you're looking at the examples, you're not looking at just what you can see. You're also thinking, what's not there? What could the teacher have done in addition to have provided this learner with additional support? So you're looking at evidence of what's there and what's not there when you're thinking about evaluating teacher's practice. I'm going to look quickly at one other example of the success criteria, because this is one that I like particularly. So this is a year 2 child in a science lesson. Okay, and this is transcribed. So it was quite difficult to see what their handwriting was saying. So I transcribed it. I just typed it up. So I'm going to give you a minute to look at that, and then I'm going to ask you the questions. So have a think about what this 6-year-old, it's actually a 6-year-old in year 2, what are they trying to say? And have a think about whether or not they've met the success criteria. Okay, you thought about it now, so I'm going to run through what they've actually written here, and you could sort of think to yourself, well, is that what I thought they'd written? What's my interpretation? This is a child that's writing very confidently about scientific phenomena, but their spelling might mean that this is difficult to understand, but actually this is a child with lots of scientific confidence. So they've written, well, okay, that the word magnets was given, so the child could use that. Magnets are attractive to some metals, but some metals, and look how that's different. So that metals and that metals are different. That's okay, but some metals aren't attractive to magnets. I know some graduates that don't know that. The magnetic force can, now I think this word is go, but they've got F's and G's a bit in a muddle. The magnetic force can go through copper. Perhaps it can go through other stuff. Magnets are attractive to some metals, but some metals aren't attractive to magnets. The magnetic force can go through copper. Perhaps it can go through other stuff. So, success criteria. Has this child included 2 facts about magnets? Magnets are attracted to some metals, but some metals aren't attractive to magnets. The magnetic force can go through copper. Great, loads of facts. Does the child use some technical vocabulary? Attractive, which is a technical term in terms of magnetism. Force, copper, metals, all of those are technical vocabulary words. Includes at least one hypothesis. Well, there's the hypothesis, the final sentence, the final question really. Perhaps it can go through other stuff. So the hypothesis is that magnetic force can go through copper. Can it go through other stuff as well? And does this pupil write in full sentences? Yes. Magnets are attracted to some metals, one sentence, but some metals aren't attracted to magnets, another sentence. So this is a pupil that's meeting all of the success criteria. But if you just look at that without thinking about it, you might make the assumption that this child is not succeeding at the level that you'd want them to. So it's important as a teacher to be thoughtful, constructive, sensitive, and to take some time to think about what's actually going on in the situation that they're looking at. Okay, so those are some examples of the thinking that a teacher might have to have when looking at a pupil's work. You're going to see what the teacher's already done. So we've got to the next stage. The examples that you are going to evaluate are examples where the teacher has already done the marking, has already given the feedback. And what you're doing is you're thinking, okay, has the teacher in this circumstance given the pupil supportive, constructive advice on how to improve their work? Is it clear to the pupil what they need to do better next time? And you're evaluating. Evaluation is about making a judgment. I'm asking you to make a judgment about whether what the teacher has done is effective or not effective. That's what you do when you evaluate something. We tend to use the word good. That's where it gets in a bit of a muddle. You know, is this a good example or not? You're evaluating it. Is this good assessment practice or not good assessment practice? And good is a very judgmental word, but what we mean in this context is this practice effective? Will it work? And your decision about whether it is effective or not has to be based on literature. What does the literature tell us is good practice? So you've got to, your decisions can't be just what you think. It can't be just based on your opinion. you have to back up your views, your interpretation, your evaluation with clear reference to literature. Okay. I wanted to pick up something else with you, and this kind of connects to the idea of formative assessment. I think this came up last week. Somebody asked for some examples of, okay, what does an essay look like? What are we doing here? So what I've done is in today's session, let me go back to my screen. Let me go back to here. So I've looked through those 3 examples there. I'm just going to track back a little bit. I'm in the live session at the moment. We've looked at the definition of AFL. We've looked at the 10 principles. We've looked at I've shared feedback suggestions. I want to motor on to the next thing. In the resources section, you've got a link to the module reading list. I'm just going to unshare and then share again, just to make sure you can see the same thing as I'm looking at. Okay, in the resources section for this week, so we're in week 3 for this week, there's your link to the module reading list. And there's loads of stuff in the module reading list. So if you're looking for literature to support your thinking, that's a good starting point. Okay, so the module reading list is there, and I've made sure that everything in the module reading list is available online. I'm not expecting anybody to leave the safety of your own home. You know, we're all conscious about COVID, and it's not getting any better from what I can make out. So look at the module reading list and look directly at the electronic links there. I'll come back to that if I've got time at the end. I put an exemplar here about what writing about assessment looks like. So what I've done is I've taken an example of a student's writing from a couple of years ago. This piece of work, let me just have a look at it to remind myself. I'm opening that up. So this is a piece of work from a student a couple of years ago. It's one small section of it. This was graded 70. So I'm sure that's what lots of you are aiming for. Perhaps all of you are aiming for. And what I've done is I've taken the middle, or not quite the middle, they used 3 different examples. So yeah, I suppose coming up to the middle of their assignment. And just to give you an idea about how you're going to be laying this out. So that's the feedback example that this particular student has used. Okay. They have used this kind of blocking thing that I've used as well to anonymize the student. So if you've created your own, if you're using examples of a friend's work or of your brother or sister's work or your daughter's work or your mum's work, make sure that they are anonymized. And then this student has called this figure 2. So when you put an example of a piece of work into an assignment, give it a name. You could say example 1, example 2, or figure 1, figure 2, illustration 1, illustration 2. That's up to you, but keep the name consistent throughout the essay. So if you call the first image figure 1, call the second image figure 2, and the third image figure 3. So this particular student is talking about this particular example, and what they've done is they've dropped the example as a screen grab. So control print screen, and they've dropped it into their assignment and done a little bit of cropping. And then in the text, they have referred to the example, and this is what they've done. They've said the second example, figure 2, is a piece of summative assessment. So they've made the decision. Well, it is obvious because it's got lots of grades here, and it is something that's given to the student at the end of a block of work. So this is an example of summative assessment. Now what they've done then is they've gone straight to literature. So this is the name of an author. So-and-so defines summative assessment as, and they've used a direct quote, which I've covered over here. And then at the end of the direct quote, they've got their year of publication and, as you know, the page number, because you have to have a page number with a direct quote. And they've followed up with a second definition or description of summative assessment. So another author, authors, because you've got describe there. So somebody and somebody describe summative assessment as, and they've got a quote there. They suggest that summative assessment, so again, from the same author, something else here with a year of publication and a page number. The student here has done some guesswork. It is likely that this piece of work was carried out at the end of a unit of work, something like that. It appears that the assessment was designed to, so what was the teacher's purpose in carrying out the assessment? What were they trying to find out? And then because this is a report on a summative test, it is unlikely that this may have a significant effect on the pupil's learning. It's very summative. I don't know to what extent the pupil gets a chance to build on this next time. And then you've got some further analysis there in figure 2 the teacher provides. So the student here is describing what the teacher has done with this example. And then this is a key phrase for you. The teacher's practice here is in line with good practice. That's what the student is about to write about. They're making a comparison between what they see in the example and what the literature about summative assessment or good assessment practice or assessment for learning says is good practice. So they're comparing and contrasting what they can see in the example, what the evidence tells them, with their knowledge of assessment practice. And you can see here that this particular student has supported this argument with a reference to one author and a reference to another author. So in this case, the reason why this particular piece of work got 70 is because this is just a part of it. Incidentally, this is not the whole assignment. Obviously, it's a 2,500 word essay, but this is the beginnings of a section on a second example in which the student is demonstrating good understanding of literature, good understanding of the theory of assessment, and is applying this theory to their evaluation of the teacher's work in this particular example. Now, sharing this example with you has two functions. One of them is a response to some questions I had last week, which was, can we see some examples? So here's an example. But the other thing, if I go back to one of the slides I showed you earlier, let's think it was in here. There we go. And back in the Cambridge assessment, let me go back to the top here. I think it was in here we came across a little bit earlier on. Here we go. Here we are. So assessment for learning. Students understand what successful work looks like for each task they are doing. So I'm sharing that example with you so you know what a successful piece of work looks like. So you've got that as a model if you need a model to support you in your thinking about this module. But also what I'm doing here is assessment for learning. I'm sharing with you what successful work looks like, and I'm explaining to you why I think that is successful work. So at this point, I'm using assessment for learning with you to explain, describe to you what a successful or an effective piece of writing in this module will look like. I'm going to come back to the main screen, and because we've got about 9 minutes of the big live session. So I want to do this as I've done with all the other sessions. I want to answer any questions you might have. See if there's anything that you'd like me to go over again and explain in more detail. And then I'm going to stop briefly at 3 o'clock. That's in 9 minutes. We're all going to have a 5-minute comfort break and have a brew. And then I'm going to come back here and then answer any individual questions that you might have. So collectively, what is it clear what we're talking about broadly when we're talking about assessment for learning? That's my first question to think about. The next thing is to think about the assignment. Are you clear about what the assignment might look like? Georgia, thank you. I'm relieved. That's great. Cool. Thanks, Connor. Super. You get the format. So it's that kind of idea that you've got, and that was the second piece of evaluation that this particular student had done. So you would have evaluation of the first example, evaluation of the second example, evaluation of the third example. And it's really important. I think I didn't emphasize it quite enough, that when you look at an example of what a teacher has done, there is also the opportunity to comment on what they haven't done. So you've got what they have put in their feedback, the comments that they've put on the students' work, but you've also think about what's missing. If you were in that teacher's shoes, what could you have done to add to the feedback to give that particular learner more information about how they could improve their work? And there's a space for you to use that. What you're doing is you're putting yourself in you're the ideal teacher, if you like. And one of the challenges for teachers in the classroom is they've got lots of other stuff to think about. You know, they've got 30 pupils, they've got the pupil over there who's trying to climb out of a window, they've got somebody rolling under a table, that display's falling down, they didn't sleep last night, they've got a terrible headache, they've got all of that stuff going on, and another 28 pupils in the classroom. They're trying to deal with all that kind of stuff. And it's very difficult when you're a teacher in that situation to be the perfect teacher, because there's lots of other stuff going on. But you've got the opportunity to look at the pieces of work and think, okay, I'm going to be the perfect teacher for the purposes of this assignment. And I'm going to really pull this apart. I'm going to think, well, what could the teacher have done? What opportunities were there to give more effective feedback or to use assessment more effectively in this particular instance? And that effectiveness will come from your reading. Just very briefly, before I hang up briefly at 3 o'clock for a short break, a 5-minute break, I just want to go back to what I said to those of us that were here at the very start of the meeting. And this was to do with the assessment examples that you will find on Aula. So I'm just going to show you exactly where those are. This is something that came up last week. I said that I'd get them. They were a bit late. I'm really sorry. I said I'd get them up by the end of last Friday. I think they appeared by the end of Saturday. They were a bit slow, but the examples on Aula of the ones that you can actually evaluate. So let me just get to the right place there. I think that's the right place. So I'm going to come back to Teams. I'm going to share my screen, sharing my screen, back into the home page. So the welcome page. So I'm on the welcome page for assessment in education. If I scroll down here, I've got the module guide, and then here I've got assessment sets for assignment. So the challenge for us this year is that coronavirus and social distancing means that it will be difficult or impossible for some of you to go into school. And what we would have done in the past is I would have said, go and find a school, go into school, go and teach, speak to a teacher, get some examples of assessment that the teacher is happy to share with you, and write your assignment based on those examples. And that's going to be very difficult this year. So what I've done is I've provided you with sets of examples, and for this assignment you choose one of these sets, not several sets. Choose a single set. With each set I've given you a very, very brief pen portrait. Okay. Boy, year 10, mainstream, secondary, low motivation, and then some work from his science book. There's a girl there, high attaining, year 9. And you can see the sorts of feedback that the teacher has added there. You've got to be a little bit careful here. You've got to be a bit clever, and you've got to think about what's the teacher's comment and what's the child's comment. Got some ticks here. You've got some examples of assessment used to support a pupil in a special educational needs school. Some Michael Jackson stickers there. There's a boy in, also an autistic boy in year 5. We've got, you could choose this one, a boy in year 11. You can see that I've chosen examples that have clear evidence of the teacher. Again, you've got some comments here. Again, set 9 here from a girl in year 2 with some feedback from the teacher, and finally a girl in year 9 mainstream. So lots of examples there. You're going to choose one of these sets. And what I said at the top of the meeting today was that if you already have a contact with a student, a learner in a nursery or a primary school or a secondary school or a special educational needs setting, and you want to make the work of that pupil the focus for your assignment, that's fine. So, and it might be that you work in an educational setting and already have access to pupils' work. You need to make sure it is anonymized, but I am fine with you finding your own set of examples of assessment. But it's got to be focused on one pupil, not lots of different pupils. So we're focusing on one pupil, and we're looking at the feedback assessment practice of the teacher or teachers who've worked with that pupil. So thinking about secondary school, in secondary school, pupils have lots of teachers, don't they? They have a history teacher, science teacher, English teacher, maths teacher. But it's the one student, the one pupil you're focusing on. So you could, for example, look at an example of feedback in history, feedback in maths, feedback in English, 3 different teachers giving one pupil feedback. That would be another thing that you could look at. So look at the differences in feedback from the different teachers. That would be another way of thinking about it. But it's one learner is at the heart of your essay. Okay, it's 3 o'clock. I am going to stop the recording, and we are all going to take a 5-minute comfort break, and then I'm going to return here to answer any questions you've got. We'll open up the floor, we'll have a conversation, let me know anything that I've not made clear. Let's do that. And I'll see you at 3:05.